Vine. We're ready to get started whenever you are.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Environment and Infrastructure Committee. I apologize. I have a miscommunication, and so I'm on Zoom, but thank you to Mr. Rickerman and Mr. Brennan, Dr. Z, Mary Pat, and the rest of staff. I know I heard Robert's voice for being in person. I apologize. I will be there in a little bit. But anyway, if we could go ahead and get started with this month's meeting, and we're going to start with our quarterly presentation from the CPAC. So is that Dr. Z? Are you making that presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, you go ahead.
All right, thank you.
Oh. I wasn't expecting to see Tamika's face pop up on my screen like that.
So my apologies in advance for all the text I'm going to give you, but I wanted to give you a comprehensive update of the things that CPAC has been working on, and the best way to do it was to give you the text to sort of report on things. So to that end, thank you very much for having us. This has been really productive to be able to have these conversations. So this update will basically have just a brief report on energy events, past and future, what we're doing with the Renewable cohort, which is new since I talked to you in April, conversations with Dominion, working on an updated resolution for the Ready for 100, and communications within the government. So, and then some reflections that I've learned over this time period of being chair of CPAC. So to that end, I've sort of have reported on things about what we've been working on in this sort of framework, where we have reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which could be reducing energy usage and changing how we're generating electricity. But then there's also the aspect in the orange boxes about how we adapt to climate change. We have not been able to work on all these things. And so one way to basically look at this in terms of what we're talking about right now, just in the blue, it's harder to tell on this front, but we've been working on outreach programs, mainly through the events, and then working with Dominion to source renewables and the Ready for 100 update. So to that end, the latest webinar was in September, and so it had students as part of it reporting on what they've been learning, and some at high school level, some in the university, and there's it kind of reported on basically things that students are learning. And in the future, so the next webinar will be mid-December, that will be basically pulling together the faith communities and talking about how climate change can be impactful for them and what they can do for things. And in my April 21st, or so my April update to you, this slide, which is a summary of it, I just took the screen capture from it. I basically asked if the city could participate in this cohort that was a free training program, year-long, funded by WRI. We've been participating in this, and I want to report on what we've been learning so far and the progress that's being made. So this is a cohort of organizations that are currently working together to build some solar energy in town. So this is the City of Columbia, University of South Carolina, Richland One, Columbia Housing, and thanks to a community member who made the connection, we now have Richland County at the table as well. And basically the goal of this project is to build a large, like 100 megawatt solar facility in the Midlands specifically, because we'd like it to have a stake, basically, you can see it, it provides jobs, etc. This will likely only provide 5 to 25% of each organization's power requirements, because this has a risk associated with it, so it has to be not everything at once. And in that this size and what we're looking at, if we'd have to go much larger to basically cover everybody's energy needs.
Dr. Z,
Yes.
would it make sense to bring in a private partner in this so that we could take advantage of the tax credits, and that way we could either reduce the cost to all the parties or create more opportunities?
So the way that this would likely be structured is through a private deal with Dominion, where there would be a third party who would be taking the benefit of those tax credits to build the infrastructure. That would be sold back to Dominion, and then we would basically get the credits that way.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have they mentioned, Dr. Z, the acreage that is needed for 100?
Yes, I'll interject, Dr. Z, just in general, around 5 acres per megawatt is what you're talking, so it's a good bit of land area.
And Richland 1 has said that they believe they have land. The city also potentially may have land that they may be able to dedicate to this. When talking to a utility scale developer, the suitability of the land and how the interconnection might work will be factors to play into whether or not Dominion will find it attractive, because that's going to be part of the balance. And so in guiding principles for all this, though, price neutrality and reliability with equity has been the guiding principle. So we're not trying to break the bank with this. Everybody involved wants it to be at the same price that they're currently getting their power. And so right now, we've talked to Dominion about this, and Dominion is open to this possibility. The other thing that this happens with having this as a cohort, because we're meeting monthly to sometimes twice a month as a cohort, it might make future procurement better with having multiple organizations coming together, even if it's not just for solar, for energy efficiency, et cetera. And we have the potential to include other partners. We just haven't yet because we've been slowly adding as there's interest expressed. And so limitations to this right now is the whole concept of the cost neutrality. Will this really be cost neutral? And it depends a lot on Dominion. In talking to some large-scale solar developers, they suspect it should be cost neutral, but Dominion right now is saying that with Act 62 and cost avoidance, that it's really going to be potentially not necessarily cheaper. That's the best way to say it. And at present, this is the only option for the city to be able to get renewable, and it's only for the city as an organization. So if we think about the Ready for 100 goals and having all the citizens being able to get solar, currently there is no mechanism other than being able to get solar on your roof, which I know that some of you haven't been able to do, that there's no way that other citizens can get solar at the moment. So that's just something to start thinking about if we need to think more creatively, how to get more renewable options to the citizens. So to that end, we've also been working on trying to revise the Ready for 100 resolution. So then in 2017, the mayor said 100% renewable for the whole community by 2036. And so we're trying to provide some greater scoping on that, to provide some stepwise goals as well, trying to understand how we can go achieve that. So to that end, there's a committee working on this revision, and there's going to be 2 separate resolutions that come out of this. First, there's going to be a city operations focused resolution. So this will have energy savings because we will ultimately use more energy as we convert fleets, et cetera, to electrical. So we're going to have to think about how to save energy by being more efficient, but then also trying to get renewables. And there's potential, perhaps, you can interject something for citizens within this part. The second will be mechanisms for how the city can partner with third parties to basically do energy efficiency, solar accessibility to the broader community, et cetera. And so we're working on trying to find the stepwise goals, interim goals of how we may be able to go do this. And this should be presented to council in early 2022. So to that end, we had a visit at CPAC with Danny Cassis, who's the VP of Customer Relations and Renewables. That was the first Tuesday of this month, I believe. Yeah, Tuesday, October 5th. And so basically he gave us an overview of what Dominion has been doing, that they're basically cautious to roll out solar too quickly because they're thinking about balancing the load, if they have enough transmission infrastructure, et cetera. They have no current large-scale plans for wind, and just for those who don't know, Dominion has their long-term plan through the IRP, or the Integrated Resource Plan, which is approved by the PSC, or Public Service Commission, every couple of years. Most recently, the Public Service Commission pushed Dominion to be slightly more aggressive on this. They will retire or convert the remaining coal electricity generation over the next decade. Biogas may be important for balancing the load in the future. And ultimately, though, their carbon neutral goals, so remember, this is not carbon zero, this is just carbon neutral, is much slower than what the city's current goals are. So to that end, we're going to have to figure out some way to be more aggressive than what Dominion wants, which means we're going to have to take initiatives that Dominion may not want us to take. So there's opportunities here, though. And so they said the first priority for the city should be focusing on energy efficiency because this will ultimately lower the long-term electricity costs. There's been many modeling studies from many organizations that have found that if you lay out that money to basically do those energy efficiencies, it can pay off in 5 years and make your operating costs lower.
Well, I think your point from the plan that y'all had brought forth before really showed us about the housing stock and why that's so important for the individual renters, and especially the renting population of Columbia, which is the majority of the homes we have.
Yes. Well,
So
just,
I think we ought to make sure that as we continue to talk about that, we make sure that we're trying to address those issues first and foremost.
so this morning, between 8:30 and 9:30, CPAC met with the State Energy Office to have a scoping conversation about green banks, and they were interested in what's possible, et cetera. But having the funding alone isn't going to be enough if we don't also have incentive programs or legal other
Right.
aspects to it. So we have to have some way to incentivize landlords to do better, to have that assistance available to renters. So there's going to have to be a partnership that happens in the future. This cohort aggregate model, from Dominion's perspective, this large-scale renewable that we're working on, is something that Dominion is open to, but Dominion suggested to us that if we want to be able to provide solar for the community, that we might want to tag on some extra megawatts to develop a community solar program as part of that cohort. I know the city is not interested in being utility, but this would not be having to balance the load. This would just be a way that you may be able to provide solar to the citizens in terms.
Through credits, just for the offsets, to
Yes.
simplify the process.
Yes, well, that's how it would be. So this, when I think SCG&E had a program previously of community solar, it was similar, where you could buy it, but you would still just get your power the normal way.
Problem was the buy cost was, if I remember, was like 17 cents or something really crazy per kilowatt, and we have to make it affordable.
Because of the scale of this, it might be more reasonable. And so we just wanted to basically lay it out there for the city as an option, that adding a community solar component to this renewable aggregate, so then making it larger than 100 megawatts, might be an option.
Yeah.
Dr. Z, I just wanted to add, I think the scale of something, utility scale, as you were saying, makes the cost avoidance model, it makes it more affordable. So I think you've seen maybe some other electric cooperatives have done something of this nature where they'll build a larger scale solar facility and allow their members to purchase a portion of it.
Some of the EMCs have done it. Actually, Alabama Power did a project with Walmart and Sherwin-Williams and some other folks, which was very interesting because at the end of the day, what they were doing is selling the power at avoided costs. It was the credits that they sold back, and that's how you balance out the cost. But everybody, at the end of the day, everybody got what they needed. You got more renewable on the system, and folks were getting the offsets that they needed. And I think that's probably the model Dr. Z is talking about, trying to, and it'd be great if we had a renewable portfolio here so we can value those credits more in South Carolina, and maybe we create our own here. I don't know. It's something maybe we ought to talk about in the city so we create some value there so that we have something really to trade with and work with to build up the system.
Well, Councilman Rickman, the more large-scale users you add to the coalition, the more attractive that tax credit stack becomes, I would say. So I think your initiative, Clint, your initiative of reaching out to the school districts, the county, I mean, if a letter of interest can be drafted up and signed, the big energy users signed up, I think that would be wonderful for us to show to the private sector, private partners out there that we look forward to this. Maybe not just Richland County, but throughout the Midlands.
Yep. There's a contact that we could potentially make also at Fort Jackson. We just need to get a little bit further along before we could do that, but anything you could help in
Yeah,
terms
state
of
and federal
people-
might be a little, partners might be a little bit.
I think the good thing about Fort Jackson is that the civilian environmental services folks have been there for a while.
Mhm.
And, garrison commanders leave every 3 years. So every time you get a project started over there, it disappears. But I think they have put some more autonomy into the civilian servants over there. So I think there's a great opportunity. I know that at Fort Benning, they have been very aggressive about doing stuff, and they've partnered with Georgia Power on a lot of these and projects that they're rolling out, and taking advantage of the excess land and things they have to really do it. So I agree, there's a great opportunity there.
Yeah, great. That's exciting. So electrification of the fleet is something that, or the fleet and transit is something that Dominion would be interested in, not only because that would make you a bigger consumer, but also because that's where they foresee things as going, and potentially as a storage mechanism in the future of doing grid to vehicle and back to the grid. And so they called this a beneficial electrification. So that also means thinking about infrastructure-wise for the city, et cetera, about electrifying the fleet, but also how to have transit as being part of the equation. And that also means we have to have more planning for EV infrastructure. I know that Mary Pat and some people with parking were part of a cohort recently thinking about how we need to go about that. Some of it is about costs, because there's a cost to go build that infrastructure, but if we don't build it, Dominion will build it for us and take all that revenue. So if you think about those conversations that you've had about the parking bond, this could be a potential resource generator in the future.
Are there case studies for that, by the way?
I can find out.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's also something, so going back to the Artuso report that Bob Petrulis presented to you in the summer, that one thing that came up is that we are ahead of the rest of the Dominion territory for having smart meters. We are not using those to an advantage right now. We will likely have time of day rates in the future. We don't know what that will mean for anybody economically, and so there needs to be some study on that. I don't know who, but there needs to be some study on what time of day rates would mean for both the city operations and residents. And an opportunity that really needs to be resolved, that many of you are familiar with, is the large interconnection queue. So this is basically how we get the solar connected and approved at the PSC level. This is why the 1 megawatt facility is still in the queue, essentially. And so to that end, we really encourage Columbia to engage with the PSC, especially on this interconnection reform issue. So limitations from this, though, and also require some lobbying perhaps, is that when Dominion was visiting with us, they referred to the Energy Freedom Act, Act 62, as having a limitation about why they couldn't take the lead on community solar, because they were talking about costs. That was not the intention of the law, and so this part of the law, the cost avoidance, is to be reviewed every 2 years. It's currently at the PSC under review right now. I have not investigated enough to know, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you all of what's going on about it. But this could be a potential for the city to get involved and talk about this, or just research to see if this is an option, if having a comment at the PSC, et cetera. So Dominion suggested we focus on transportation first, but that doesn't really consider how the energy is generated. You might electrify, but if you still get dirty electricity, that doesn't matter. So you kind of have to push on all things at once. We want renewables faster than Dominion, is really what's happening. So we will require a lot of advocating on our part. I added a slide here. This is a new slide because it's basically an opportunity that has presented itself since I made the slides last week. Mary Pat, Penny Catherine from the Sierra Club and I participated in a scoping call a few weeks ago with the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is from the DOE. They have $100 million to help cities do better. They were interested in talking to us because the mayor had made the grand proclamation of Ready for 100. And so they were curious to see what progress we had made on those goals and whether or not we needed help doing better. We were invited back to a second call, and this will essentially have the possibility to have technical assistance in the city. At the moment, they don't think they can do capital costs, but if enough cities identified that that was an issue, then they would be potentially able to find another pot of money that would be able to help on that front. This could help with long-term technical assistance to short-term technical assistance, basically what could happen. So we're going to find out more at the next workshop in terms of trying to understand what's possible. Yeah, and so...
Dr. Z, when is that next workshop?
So that is November 16th. So in terms of this next sort of call, and I put on the slide the questions they ask when you register, because I thought that was kind of important for y'all to see. So does your community have clean goals? How many staff do you have, and how far are you along in meeting those goals? How would you categorize your current needs? And I'm like, we need all the help you can offer.
Yep.
So essentially, there's lots of opportunity, and we were quite honest with them about the limitations about what was going on, and so it was a useful call, and I'm optimistic. So to that end, I told you about that, they have $100 million, and they're interested in us because of the specific political goals. So I'm putting that out there because those goals might seem hard, they might seem challenging, but they're very important because sometimes they open doors for us. Okay, so then there was also Claire Windsor presented to us about a survey that she had done across the Midlands. She talked to many of you, and it was communications across the Midlands on how people are doing with their climate change action. These were 30 to 90-minute interviews with city staff, CPAC, nonprofits, county, etc. Key themes emerged that major events spurred reactive measures, so that's like the flood, BC Sumner debacle, etc. But there's limited communication and collaboration. We're working on that now with the cohort. But the challenges that she identified were basically funding from state and national policies, utility action, limited community involvement, limited staff, and reliant on volunteer work. And so she said that when she synthesized everything, that we need to diversify and expand who's at the decision-making table, increase the staff commitment with specific reports, plans, and check-ins, hold city staff and the officials accountable and responsible for the commitments and plans. I want you to be bold, basically she's saying, but we also need to be having some teeth to that boldness. And then we need to increase collaboration outside the city with local, statewide, energy, environmental, utility stakeholders, etc. So keep on communicating with Dominion, work alongside the Energy Office, and then review city plans and commitments regularly, potentially have annual plans, and then communicate that more broadly. And we also could be doing a lot more to partner with the university. One thing that I want to just note is that two of us in CPAC are part of the department that houses the environmental science program, the environmental studies program, but then also that's the MERM program. So that was a master's program that used to serve as a bunch of interns. The Public Works is also the same department that we work in, so we can help scope things. I think the problem right now is we don't have scope for projects, nor funding for internships at the moment, so we have to work on that. So, I told you at the beginning, this is where we're at. However, I want you to think about this as potentially being more broad. This could essentially start turning into having energy efficiency, community solar, getting an EV charging network with the comment, bike lanes. Is there going to be more flooding infrastructure? I want to point out here that I have trees plus heat, and there's a prof at the university, Kirsten Dow, who's doing basically a remote sensing tree survey at the moment to start looking at where the trees are being planted from an equity standpoint, how that will help with heat. But one thing that we're trying to do is have the coordination between CPAC and the Tree Commission happen at the staff level, not the volunteer level, to start building in relationships so that there's more continuity, because we will turn over on CPAC over time, and we'd like there to be more infrastructure with the city across the org chart. So this is more than a committee effort, is basically what I want you to see from this. And so that we really need to have climate awareness across departments. And so we need to basically have more people talking. We have had more people attending CPAC meetings, and this has had a great morale boost, at least for me, in terms of having parking there and energy, etc. However, we have not fully been engaging with everybody. We need to do better on that front. So just to give it a summary, we started a communications subcommittee recently. We're continuing communication with the State Energy Office, which will start more conversations about potential funding, depending what happens in DC over the next few weeks, months, etc. This could be blossoming. The State Energy Office has predicted it's almost tenfold increase about what they might have for funding. Green Bank scoping conversations will continue, etc. CPAC is going to report on what's possible for franchise agreements based on what they have researched in other cities, and we're going to continue with the cohort. We also have leadership election coming in January. And then just as an observation, we have ambitious and passionate volunteers. But one thing that I personally really need us to have is more guidance from the city. We can come at you all we want as volunteers with ideas, but we want to be able to be the most effective and useful and have guidance. And we're starting to get that, and so I'm starting to ask for it more, and we're starting to get it, but I just need a little bit more. And so this is simply because there's limited staff, especially on the technical aspect, and from a risk standpoint, most of the technical work is being done by one person who's already overcommitted right now. And so perhaps if we could have more people working on it, that would be great. The current legal framework is really limiting our choices, especially for citizens and small businesses. So this is where lobbying will come into a big aspect for the politicians of the city. And we're not really doing a lot to advocate for citizens, and we need to do more on that aspect. And so my recommendations are basically empower and charge more staff to work on this, and have greater community efforts and how we can do things, and not just rely on the volunteers. We're happy to help, but we also want to provide the most constructive feedback we can. And that the Ready for 100 was intended to be community-wide, but this is where we're going to need the political courage from council, essentially, to help at the state level make that more possible. So that's all I've got for you.
Thank you, Dr. Z. I do have a couple questions, but let me start with my colleagues that are in the room with you. Will, do you have any questions or
Yes,
comments?
Chairman, just a quick note, Dr. Z, with your real job at USC,
Yes.
I'm faculty there, the comment has taken on all of the transportation system for University of South Carolina. So working through your access and network at the University of South Carolina to really push the EV with comment, I think would be wonderful. They have a strong voice now with the comment system as we service the growing university campus. So, and with the federal funding opportunities for EV in the future, I think that would be wise to really engage the university, their voice with the comment.
I'll work on that.
And then obviously, Dr. Z, we talked about earlier, is getting the university really engaged. I think the city's ahead of them, and we need to partner together wherever we can to make a bigger impact. And I appreciate all the discussion you and I had earlier, but I do think we all ought to be working together. This is a collaborative effort. We're the biggest energy users combined together.
They're almost twice what you are as
Yeah.
the city. To that end, just so others know, in terms of currently there's not a lot of initiative at the university on this front, where Larry Cook, who's the main sustainability person, is within housing, if you think about org charts a lot. And we have never really had lots of leadership from the presidential level on this. And so something that is being starting to spur, and that I'm pushing it along with Keely Carter at the Darla-Bourne Business School, that we're going to start a Dean's Council, hopefully, that will have people from all across campus to pull facilities, research, teaching, et cetera, together, so that we can basically start from the bottom up before we have new leadership.
That sounds like a good question to add for the new search for the president of USC.
Yes.
Their
Well,
use of sustainability and
The interim
innovation.
president signed the coalition with all the universities almost, 10 years ago?
And then stopped reporting on it, but I think that was maybe, I'm speculating, could have been political why it stopped.
Might
Because-
have been, but
Yeah.
the commitment's there. Now we just need to move it forward, because it does have a big impact all the way across the spectrum of
And
Columbia.
to that end, there's going to be opportunities to have partnerships going forward. Like, and so there's an EV charging network that was talked about in the northern states a few weeks ago. That type of thing is likely to happen within this state as a partnership between the state energy office and a university. That is likely not to go to USC. So we have to be thinking in the future, what could USC position itself for to be part of the solution going
Do you
forward?
think USC's, you mentioned that they are twice the energy user we are. Do you think that's from deferred maintenance and just just old energy plants?
I don't know the breakdown of how things are, but I know that, like, I have a lab that has fume hoods, that those fume hoods, some of them operate all the time. A single fume hood is 30 houses. And so there's that in terms of, there's also housing. And so there's lots of aspects, but there is also deferred maintenance that's
Gotcha.
part of the
And I
equation.
guess my last question, Chairman Devine, Clint, are you the point person in discussions with Dominion for our solar path forward and the kind of group we're trying to bring together?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have been.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Rickman, do you have additional questions or comments?
No, ma'am.
Right. Okay, Dr. Z, a couple, I was trying not to interrupt you, so I wanted to write them all down. You mentioned that, I guess, the next community outreach or webinar you're going to do is about faith
Yes.
outreach. How are you marketing that, and kind of how is that being put together?
So that my understanding is that Bob Petrulis and Tamara Warren, who've been working on that in the past, that they're reaching out to, I believe, to Interfaith Power and Love. There's some organizations in town that they have reached out to who are already thinking about these aspects. Because it is, for certain faith communities, it is already part of the equation. The Pope had climate change in the encyclical. Some churches also have creation care as part of their work. So there's work with some local organizations. If you have some suggestions of who you would like us to reach out to, please let us know.
Okay, yeah, I may have some, so I'll do that. Also, just the same line you talked about, like the DOE, EPA is doing a whole lot, and I gather they just did a local government advisory council. Our first meeting was Friday. I apologize. I got the notice late, and so I sent it to Mary Pat, and she was unable to sign on. And I wasn't able to be on the entire meeting because it was like 4 hours. But from what I understand from Secretary Regan, a lot of his priorities align with a lot of things that we're going to be doing. And if the American Jobs Plan passes, there will be some potential for energy development block grant money and things like that. So, and he did mention cooperating or working with other cabinet agencies to include DOE. So I think that we need to really, and I'll try and make sure that I stay on top of that. We need to continue to monitor that. And I don't know if that, Clint, would be you or Mary Pat, if we could ask maybe Ralph to look out from our standpoint on the federal level. And I think there's going to be opportunities, not just for technical assistance, but funding opportunities for local governments that are ready with different projects. So I want to make sure that we're watching and monitoring that.
Will do, yes, ma'am.
This is also, to that end though, this is also where CPAC is trying to figure out how to be most helpful to the city. Can we help with some of those scoping mechanisms if there's not that work being done easily right now within the city?
Definitely. And when we report out this afternoon, we'll say that to the rest of the council as well. And I think we need to, you're right, we need to do better at having some actual action items or deliverables that you guys can help us with. Because I know that Mary Pat is doing a lot, and I know she's helping in solid waste and some other things. So we need to be able to expand her capacity with, the volunteer expertise that y'all bring to the table.
Madam Chair.
I was just going to let you know that we do have on our agenda the appointments of the non-voting members, and so we will be move that forward. But I do think that we need to have, in addition to these quarterly updates, maybe there needs to be two-way. So we'll make sure that council is giving you guys some specific directions, and hopefully we can get to that action plan so that we can start reporting. And the last thing I just wanted to say, and Clint, this might be for you to talk with PR and other things, but I know that we'll have this meeting on YouTube. But I like the way Dr. Z presented, like what they're working on and what are some of the deliverables. And I just think that if we had an opportunity for the public to see kind of where we are and what some of the things are being worked on, that would be useful information to have somewhere on the website. I'm not exactly sure where the best area, but I'd like to see that.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I just wanted to add, I think we can't forget about the private sector money and leveraging it. We've talked a lot about federal funding, but taking federal funding and a lot of the private sector funding and opportunities of partnership like other communities have done have really leveraged that money, and they're really able to make a big impact. So I think we need to go down both paths and make sure that we're recognizing what's out there and what could be available for us to use in jointly with the feds and even local and state money to really make an impact.
There's a CPAC member who brought up just this morning about how we should be using the empowerment zone and other sort of business opportunities, and we're not doing enough engagement on that front and how we could do better. So I just want to say thank you very much for having volunteers as being part of the city. I know we've stirred the pot a lot, and so I appreciate the pot stirring that we've done and the cooperation that has come out of this. And so just thank you so much for this opportunity.
No, thank you. Thank you
Thank
for all the
you.
hard work. And then there was Robert.
Mr. Anderson?
Councilwoman Devine, I also wanted to mention that we've got Rick Blackman from Code Enforcement that's going to help with this discussion about grass and leaf debris and potential options that we have moving forward. So I wanted to recognize Rick as well.
Thank you, Rick.
Ms. Devine, I'm a little confused, but not much confused. I think we had a discussion, I think, to begin with about maybe blowing material into the street and the contractors and the residents around town blowing material in the street. There actually is an ordinance right now that Rick could speak to. It's 82-237 that they do somewhat enforce. There is some limitations to that enforcement on what they do, but we believe that if we're going to truly start enforcing this in a greater length, that what we ought to do is a huge, possibly education campaign and use all the means necessary that we have through, whether it be city PR, stormwater, public works, water, wastewater, anybody we can to get the word out that we're going to start aggressively acting on our ordinances.
Can we review that? Can you give me a quick rundown of what that ordinance says?
Yes.
All right, so basically it just says that you can't blow or sweep any debris into the street. So what we've done historically is we will, if we encounter it or if we get a report of it and we can catch them doing it, we'll go out and issue them a summons, and we'll take them to court and do it that way. It's not a huge problem in most of the residential areas. It seems to be more of a problem downtown for whatever reason, I imagine, because the way that it's laid out, it's yard, sidewalk, more grass than street, and typically they don't want to pick it up over the curb and put it where it should be placed. They'll blow it. They know the street sweeper is going to come through. Essentially, is what we've gotten from them. So,
But would you say that commercial lawn service landscape providers? I'm just
yeah, I mean,
trying to, they use the blowers
historically, those are the
to
ones
blow it
that-
in the street and blow it into a pile. Is that who we're talking about as
yeah, when we have caught
the offenders,
folks
or?
doing it, it's typically it's companies, and not maybe I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. It's not. It's typically somebody that's doing yard work for somebody
Right.
else, and it's just quicker and easier for them to do that. Now, some of our inspectors have been confused when they'll see it because they will blow it out, like you said, or like you're implying, they'll blow it out into the street so that they can then pile it back up. But again, to speak to the original complaint, I think that also is part of the problem because you're not supposed to put the leaves in the street to begin with, but they will because, again, of how it's set up. You're going to see piles of landscaping debris in the road because there's just not another good place to put it. They're not going to pick it up over the curb and put it, in front of their house, which is typically where it should, or where the ordinance says it should go.
It should go in the right of way, is what the curb, above the curb.
Right, well, I mean,
Not
according
in
to
the street, but
ordinance,
in
right,
somebody's
like,
yard.
According to the ordinance, it should not be in the street at all. But again, that's speaking to the social media campaign because I
Yeah.
don't know how many people know that it
Well,
should.
that
Not many.
creates a whole other issue
Yeah.
though, because then you got the clamshells tearing up all the right of way,
Correct.
trying to
Right.
pick it up. So that's really why everybody puts it in the street, because they don't want to have all that.
Right, and so there's really not a good.
So
there's really
I was
not a
about to
good-
say, is there maybe twofold? Maybe there needs to be some education about what the current rules are, and in addition to that, a letter to the commercial landscaping businesses maybe we could utilize business license to maybe find that out and just send a letter to those, because I think it's a lot of times it is the companies. But I think there's two things happening. I think the complaint that I recently got, and I've seen it too, that like literally it's not just blowing it in the street. We have some that will blow it into our drains because they feel like that's getting it out of the way. And so, I mean, that one clearly can't be done, but people who feel like they're trying to, do their yard, be nice and neat, and then put it right there at the curb. And as Councilman Rickman said, so that we're not messing up, the curb, they're doing it on the street. But, and honestly, we know that we're behind. And so if it's taking us 2 or 3 weeks to pick up, and then you've got rain or wind and other things, and you have additional leads that are getting blown into our infrastructure. So I think that we probably need to consider, is there something, a fix for that, whether it is, utilizing, we talked about one time, Robert, and this is the research I wanted you to bring. I mean, we talked about one time, whether or not we would go to some kind of bin structure where people could put leaves in. But I think the longer term, we need to think about that, but shorter term, making sure that people are aware of what the current rules are, and then how do we not only inform people, but then how are we enforcing that?
Okay, we switch back over. So, correct, Ms. Devine, I think there was a twofold issue today, and one of them is that we talked about doing a social media campaign, and one of them was a letter to a lot of the commercial, and we can get them from the business license to explain to them what to do. The other one that we've talked about a couple times since my career here is actually having a bagging ordinance or using a container for the material. I've kind of detailed that out again. I mean, a bagging ordinance would definitely clean up the material in the street. It would definitely make the aesthetics of Columbia a little bit better. There's some negative parts of that just from a solid waste standpoint. Currently we collect about 45,000 tons of debris. We would think about 50 or 60% of this is baggable. We've kind of put the numbers together where, we're looking at possibly $800,000 or $900,000 in bag purchases from the residents of Columbia with what they could do. Not everything's ever going to be bagged, so we would have to start giving some thoughts to how do we handle our other material that we require it, as Richland County does, to be bundled and in 4-foot length, so it's easily contained. It doesn't get spread around. But we also have our composting operation. And our composting operation, when you start putting bags in it, are you going to use biodegradable bags? If you use biodegradable bags, you still have to have some sort of turner to start helping them decompose a little bit quicker.
And sort out all the foreign material.
And sort out all the foreign materials and the lawnmower blades that people are going to put in them that we've seen over the years. And so there are some drawbacks to that we would have to put some money into our composting operation. I believe you guys got a copy of what we put together today about what it would cost to convert our composting operation over to this. I will mention today, and I've got Samantha who is digging into this, Atlas Composting is actually making some bigger stands in the state. They're, I believe, taking over Lexington's operation, their composting operation, that they're starting to introduce some food waste into it. We're going to reach out to them and see if we can't get them back into our operation. Of course, I think if we get food waste into our operation, then we know they're going to have some sort of mechanical turner, that maybe we could find some agreement and some common ground to get into a bagging ordinance that would make it a little bit better for us, but we would still have a cost to our citizens.
Would you not, at that point, if you could do a deal with the Atlas guys, Joseph and them, wouldn't it be smarter for us to go to a bin process? Because then you could have a one-armed bandit or something pick that up in conjunction with them, and maybe that's part of what they provide. They would get that on a frequent basis, where then you've got green waste, but that allow us to put household grease in there, that allow us to put food waste, other stuff, which would really increase less material going to the landfill.
And it would. A containerized project would be good. I know that Rubbermaid used to make a container that had an aerification deal in the bottom of it to allow that. I think what we have an issue with is what are you gonna do when you get outside of a true 105-gallon container of, when somebody cleaned their yard in the fall or something? So we'd really have to think of a city that we're maybe limiting the amount of material a person could put out at the curb each week. I mean, our memo, even as we've written it today, says, hey, let's suspend this in November, December, so we can actually vacuum the leaves up.
Which brings an interesting point to think about as we're talking about bagging. One of the complaints that we always get is move-in time, in and out, and how much stuff gets piled on. I know you hear it more than ever, but couldn't you do the same thing during lawn time where we could put, here's an opportunity where we know where the concentration of everything happens. Is there a way that you could say, we drop off a dumpster, full open top that could be filled, so when these excess things, they could fill it and you could pick it up, so you're almost doing it like a community drop. Hey, we know you're gonna have these issues, fill it up, pull it out, replace it during these critical time pieces, which would help you and also help the community, because not everything is out in the street.
So Samantha, about 45, 60 days ago, actually brought something that was happening in Florida, I believe, Samantha, that they're doing exactly the same thing during the pandemic, and we've all been behind on trash collection with our labor problems and everything else. I reached out to West Columbia and talked to their public works director quite a bit, who his dad used to be the street division superintendent, public works director over here, so I know Jamie very well. They actually have a hook lift truck in West Columbia. He thought that Samantha's idea is exactly what the idea they're doing in Florida is, actually putting these containers out for just that purpose. Councilman Brennan over here sent me an email about 3 months ago that said, hey, let's do this during move out. Maybe we can get some containers. We are getting some cost of putting that together, of maybe the city buying a truck and buying some kind of a hook lift style truck that we could rapidly deploy containers, not only for, some of the larger areas of leaves or during certain times of year, especially right now during the pandemic, or certainly during the college move outs that we can.
And that was a program that they're doing in Charleston that you're actively talking to them about, pros and cons, correct?
It seems to be pretty nationwide.
Yeah.
Everybody's starting to gravel just because of staffing issues and others, but convenience factor and, not having everything in the street.
Yeah. These containers would have a lot of use, but we're just starting to get cost on that and putting those prices.
Well, how big are they? Are they bigger than our roll carts currently? What are we talking about?
So the truck containers we're talking about would probably be somewhere between
roll-off.
20 and 30 yards. It'd be a roll-off truck. If you get into a 40-yard container, you probably get into too big.
So
for
they would
anybody
just
to
be
throw
dropped
on
in
top.
a couple points in the neighborhood, you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah, drop it on a Friday, pick it up on a Sunday or Monday, and, give people time to, hey, if you're cleaning out or you're moving out, here it is. I noticed they do it in Athens when we were moving in this past thing. They had dumpsters lined up everywhere. So it's that transition in July from everything. So then those kids would throw away old furniture, whatever, mattresses, trash, and then they would pick it up, and it relieved the pressure off the solid waste, but it kept stuff out of the streets and people didn't have to look at it.
But you're saying take it to another level for yard debris pickup, quarterly, monthly,
Yeah,
permanently?
And what we're going through right now, what we talked to West Columbia about, Jamie said, hey, we've got 7 containers. We could drop them all over West Columbia, and people that didn't want to wait for our yard trash collection to come around, they could actually take them to these containers,
Interesting.
swap the containers out
I
very
gotcha.
quickly and move on. So, like I said, we're just starting to put those costs together and figure out, do you really want a roll-off truck or a hook lift truck? And I dealt with roll-off years ago. I've never really done a hook lift truck, but it seems like they have a little better capability of getting into parking places and stuff. So we're just starting to look at
I
that, but
think
that
it's
could definitely
think it's a good
complement
idea.
anything we're doing.
Absolutely.
So Robert, I think as we prepare for next budget season, we'll have numbers that we can present to council for their consideration if we want to move in that direction for services as well.
Correct.
Perfect.
Right. Thank you. And then Robert, just on the other one, y'all will let us know when those letters go out to the commercial or the landscape businesses and share with us the social media so we can amplify it.
Yes, ma'am, we'll put something together.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shealy, I think that's it. Do you have anything else for us?
No, ma'am, that was all on our agenda, and soon we'll have a report out this afternoon, but I think that's everything we had.
Awesome. All right, thank you all, and we will see you guys at 2.
Thank you.